Hi, welcome. So this is one of two sessions that I did at Community Summit North America about a month ago, I guess now. A little more than a month. And unfortunately, my sessions weren't among those that they picked to record. So I'm recording them for my YouTube channel so that people have access to presentations that I did at Summit. Just because I probably won't have another chance to present those in any other conferences anytime soon. So I figured it'd be worth the effort here. So, just by way of introduction, a little bit about myself. My name is Barrett, and I am a Microsoft MVP for Power Automate and .NET. I'm also an architect working for a company called Nimble Pros. We're a consulting firm out of Ohio, but we work pretty much anywhere. Mostly focused on .NET development, but we're capable of doing pretty much anything you need. You can see the rest about me there. I do a lot of speaking, blogging, and things like that. So about this session. So what we're talking about today is Copilot, and specifically as it relates to Power Automate and how it's used in the various Power Automate environments. We with Copilot and with AI in general, the quality of the response that you get greatly depends on you know the environment and the prompts that you write and things like that. So we're going to be talking today about Copilot specifically in Power Automate and what it can do, what it can't do, what it's good at, what it struggles with. We'll talk first about cloud flows, and then we'll kind of take a step back and talk about prompts in general and how to write good prompts and what are some examples there. Then we'll jump over to Power Automate Desktop and talk a little bit about Copilot there and the differences between that and Cloud Power Automate. I'll touch briefly on Automation Center, and then we'll go over to Copilot Studio, which is really where the partnership of Power Automate and Copilot really comes into play and is really effective. And at the end, I'll talk about some additional resources, things you can look at. So let's talk about Copilot in general. We all know that AI is a mixed bag right now. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it helps, sometimes it's useful, a lot of times it hinders, and sometimes it goes completely off the rails. It gets completely messed up. There are any number of examples from recent years of Copilot just going completely insane, or not Copilot, but AI in general. The good news is that in Power Automate, because of its narrow focus, Copilot actually tends to be more useful than not. So just in general, across Power Automate platforms, the things that it can do, it can help you to create and edit your Power Automate flows. It can help you to describe a flow. So for instance, if somebody, hands you a complex flow and says, here, take a look at this, see what you can do with it. Power Automate or can help you summarize that, so you don't have to spend a lot of time, delving into the various details. It also has the ability to be on the receiving end of calls from other copilots. Or sorry, Power Automate has the ability to be on the receiving end of calls from copilots. And as we get into Copilot Studio and talking about that a bit, we will kind of delve into that and the kinds of things that it can do there. Let's start with cloud flows. So you open it up, Power Automate in the cloud. You're very used to by now. If you've worked with it all, you've seen this screen a lot, where at the very top it gives you this pop up or this block at the very top of it says create your automation with Copilot. So let's jump over there to our browser. Okay, so here you have make.powerautomate.com, your standard cloud Copilot or cloud Power Automate interface. And as I mentioned, here at the very top, you're going to see this, create your automation with Copilot, and it does pretty good with creating, uh, especially fairly basic flows. As you get more complicated, You do have a limit of 500 characters of what you can type into there. So, there are some limitations on the amount of detail that you can provide, but in general, you want to provide as much detail as possible. So, for instance, if I were to put in, when I receive a file in email, save it to a folder. Let's start with that as our basic example here. We'll just click generate. And as you can see, what it will do is it'll pop up screen here. It says working on it. Sometimes it takes a little while. Sometimes it's pretty quick. But here you can see we have a result. So we have a trigger, when an email arrives in Office 365 Outlook, actions, it'll create a file in OneDrive for Business. And it actually, sometimes it'll give you just one version. Sometimes it'll create multiple versions. So let's take a look at what the second option here is. Again, same trigger, when an email arrives in Outlook, then it'll say for each, get the attachment and save the file to SharePoint. Well, um, so, of those two examples, neither one really does what I want it to do. So, my prompt was very basic. I said, when I receive a file in email, save it to a folder. Well, what if I'm using Gmail instead? So what if was I use Gmail and not Office 365 Outlook? Let's see what we'll do there. So you can provide more details, and sometimes it will get it, sometimes it doesn't. So it says, okay, it couldn't create something like that. So what I will tend to do, instead of adding additional details there, or at the bottom, what I'll do is go back up to the top. So instead of that, when I receive a file in email, say when I receive a file in Gmail, save it to a folder, and try that again, see what it comes up with. Okay, so it didn't wasn't able to do that. So, well, like I say, sometimes it's useful, sometimes it works pretty well, sometimes it has difficulty. So what if instead of Gmail, so let's say email, save it to OneDrive, and then post a message to a Teams channel. If I did something like this, so you can see as I'm providing a few more details to the prompt. And now here you can see it says okay, and again it didn't really get what I was saying here. So it's a start. It does okay. Let's look at the second version here. So this is actually even better. So this is actually pretty close to what I want. But as again, what if I'm using Gmail? Well, the trigger is not quite right. Well, I can go ahead and do that. So let's do keep it and continue. And as a standard thing when you're creating it here, it'll say, okay, look at your connections. Those all look fine. Go ahead and click create. And you can see here, it's created my flow here. I just need to, change some details. So for instance, you pick a folder to put it into. We'll just pick the root file name. So, you have to do your basic configuration like you would. That, let's say from the email, for each current item. And I'd have to go through that, and then the content. I have to figure out what the current items or what the items are. Attachments content. Instead of that, I would do like attachments name, things like that. So you set up your configuration, you create your flow. Well, what if I have, or what if I've got an existing flow here and I want to make some changes to it? So let's go over here to Copilot and say, okay, after posting, after, what do I want to say here? After saving the files, I want to send a new email to different account. Something like that. There we go. Hit that. So you've got this box, this Copilot box over here on the right that gives you various options, things that you can work with. So you can see if you put that in there, and what it would say is, okay, we've added this action here, send an email to another account, and you can see it's popped up there, and you just have to put in the configuration pieces. So the ability of Copilot to create and to update the flows in the cloud, it works pretty well. And as you can see here in Copilot on the sidebar here, you can add up to 2,000 characters. I don't know why it's different here than on the main screen where it only limits you to 500 characters, but that's fine. You can use it to get started. And one of the things that I found in working with Copilot in Power Automate is you want to provide as much detail as possible in your prompts, and we'll talk about prompts here in a second. But um, you can't always provide all the detail that you need to. So maybe you need to create a flow that has 15 different steps, and it needs to do things like maybe gather my files, save files, check files for sentiment analysis, using AI Builder or something like that, and just go through the various steps and do all these different things. We can't describe all that to Copilot at once. So generally, what I find is the most effective thing is to start with a description of the trigger and maybe like the first action, because you need a trigger and an action to start with for a flow to be useful, and then iterate from this screen, the editing screen. Say, okay, for the next step, I need you to do this. For the next step, do this, or the next couple of steps, do this and then do this, and that works pretty well. It generally most of the time will understand what you're talking about. It will get it. It will see the context of things that are there, and it'll be able to work with you in an iterative process in order to make your interaction with Copilot as effective as possible in creating and editing your flows. I just realized that I'm covering up the screen here. Move my image over here. So yeah, so like here on this, you can see it'll let you do 2,000 characters here. Whereas on the create screen, it will only let you do 500 characters. So back home here, if I were to type in this, it would limit me to 500. Although it doesn't, well, maybe they've changed that because it doesn't even show you the limit now. Maybe it's 2,000 here as well. I don't know. I haven't experimented with. We'll find out. But what if you have an existing flow? So let me open up one of my existing flows here. So let's go to like my new blog post flow here. And what this blog post does, and I can explain it to you personally, is that it checks the RSS feed for my website, and if it spots a new blog post that's been posted, it will post links to my social medias, so to LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. Well, what if somebody has given me this flow and I don't want to go through all these steps and try to figure it out myself? I come over here, I can open up and say, summarize what this flow does. And what Copilot will do is give you a description. So it says it parses post details, extracts, categories into hashtags, composes the, my social media messages with the title and the hashtags, and shares that on each platform. And, kind of a summary at the bottom. Summarize, or it automates cross-posting new blog articles to multiple social networks. So it gives me a pretty good description of what this flow does and what its purpose is and how each of the steps works. And you can see that, looking at the design over here. So Copilot can give you a great summary of an existing blog or existing flow very quickly, and it can summarize it much more quickly than you could by examining the steps itself. So that's one of the most useful things that Copilot can do for Power Automate is when somebody shares a flow with you, it allows you to summarize that very quickly. Let's jump back over here to our slides. And let's talk about prompts in general. So, um, what makes a good prompt? So, as with AI, with Copilot, as with all AI in general, the quality of the response that you get depends greatly on the quality of the prompt that you write. It's a whole skill set these days to write good and effective prompts. Um, and there are some things that you can do to make your prompts much more effective. So, first thing is to be descriptive. I mentioned, provide as much detail as you can within the limits of it. The number of characters that you have, or tokens, or whatever it might be that you're using to limit, how much you can share with your AI agent at a time. Make your instructions clear and detailed as possible. And if you need more room, like I say, be iterative. That's another thing. Down here, the fourth step, be iterative. Copilot, like a lot of AI, doesn't get things right the first time. It'll screw things up, or may not understand, or it'll give you something different. For instance, the demo I was doing a minute ago, I put in, when I receive an email, what I meant was Gmail. It'll make assumptions because you didn't provide the details, you didn't provide the context. So don't hesitate to be iterative. Say, no, that's not right. You did this. I wanted this, or I wanted that. If it still isn't getting it right, be thoughtful. Think about the instructions that you're doing. Copilot is like an entry level worker, somebody who just barely entered the job market, who doesn't understand the job, doesn't understand all the responsibilities. So, stop, take a step back, think about what it is that you want it to do, and explain it to Copilot the same way that you would to somebody who was day one on the job. Um, Ask yourself, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I'm actually trying to accomplish? Obviously, if you've been in a job for a while, you have certain approaches that you use, certain terminology that you use that somebody who's day one on the job isn't going to understand. So think about it that way. But also use natural language more than technical language. Try to like I say, explain it to you like you would to a coworker who doesn't have the experience. Be straightforward. Don't use fluff. Don't use a lot of fancy words. Be plain and descriptive, and straightforward in the words that you're using. Keep it as simple as possible, but as descriptive as possible at the same time. Context. Copilot will not understand the context. You in your head, you know what it is that you mean. You know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Well, you need to convey that to another one. Instead of saying retrieve the sales figures, you have to say retrieve the sales figures for our 2025 United States clients for Division A from the Snowflake database. Um, you have to provide the context that makes the details relevant and useful. And as I mentioned, be specific. If you can, if you're familiar with Power Automate, tell it which tell it which connectors to use. Instead of saying send an email, say send an email from or send a message from my Gmail account. If you want to use OneDrive Personal, make sure you specify OneDrive Personal instead of OneDrive for Business. Things like that. Um, if you, and that's tied to context as well. If you know what it is that you want to use, make sure you specify that in the prompt, and it will be much more effective at that. Again, here's some examples. Create a flow to send an email, create a flow to send an email to Bob. Well, Copilot doesn't know who Bob is. Create a daily flow that sends an email. Well, that's not very effective either. But if you do something like the last example there, say, create a flow that will run once per day at 6 a.m. Eastern time, gather my current list of tasks from the to-do connector, and then send that an email using 365 to this particular user with the subject line, and so on and so forth. Provide as much detail as possible in a clear and expressive way, and you'll find that what Copilot generates for you will be much more effective in those circumstances. All right, so let's talk about desktop and how it differs a little bit from the cloud Power Automate. Um, so you'll see, and this actually the screenshot's out of date since Record with Copilot is gone now. It's no longer an option. So you can just ignore that, and all you'll get is the same screen now as you would on um, the cloud flow. You'll see, describe with Copilot what it is you want to accomplish, and it will walk you through in much the same way. So let's jump over here to Power Automate for desktop. All right, so here we have Power Automate desktop. And you can see now that unlike the slide I was just showing, it's pretty much the same screen as Cloudflow. Now you get this get started by describing what you want to automate, and you can see here it limits to 500 characters. I'm not sure if Cloud is the same anymore. If you're using an older version of desktop, you may also see that message that says record with Copilot. If you see that, then you need to update your Power Automate desktop version. It's something that no longer functions. One of the things to note about Power Automate desktop is there are some significant, well, not significant, but there are some differences between Copilot for this one and Copilot for the cloud. And I'll kind of go through some of that here. Things that you just kind of have to keep in mind when you're working with desktop. Another thing to remember is that for desktop, Copilot is still in preview, and it works almost as well, but there are some quirks and some things that it doesn't do very well. Um, so let's describe what we want to do here. So I want to open Excel spreadsheet, create a new worksheet with today's date as the name, and copy the data from the main worksheet to the new sheet. So let's go with that prompt here and see what it generates. And it'll take a minute here. You can see that when I did that, it pops up over here on the right. Once you get into edit mode, it will appear over here on the right as well. Let's give it a minute here. All right. So now we're here in the designer, and you can see what it has generated here. So we've got one of the things you notice too is that when it generates anything using Copilot, it will surround that with these two notations, start of AI generated actions, end of AI generated actions. And then you'll see a region with basically a summary of the prompt that you gave it as the description for the region. Those are kind of annoying, but I can understand why they put them in there. It really is, I guess, important to know what AI is generated for you to start with. When I'm actually, using that and I'm creating things for desktop using that, I will go through and delete at least these two steps, like 1 and 13 here. I'll delete those just to clean it up and make it look a little neater. But it's all right, I guess. So you can see what it generated here. It says launch Excel, and it will open. So obviously we'll have to go in here and do some configuration. Pick which actual file to open here. But so here it's getting the current date and time. It's converting that to text. It's creating a new worksheet using that date text as the name. Setting the active worksheet. So the very first worksheet is the active one. gets the data off that worksheet, changes the active worksheet to the new one, and it writes the data to that, and then it closes Excel. So very straightforward. One of the things I've noticed that uh, with this, it doesn't always get all the steps that it needs to perform the task that you want it to. A lot of times this close Excel step will get left off, won't actually close Excel. So you have to kind of watch and be careful with what it generates here. And that's fine. Another thing that you'll notice here is that it will often come up with errors, especially related to arguments or data uh, variables that get generated. So, for instance, here unknown argument read as text. Um, Sometimes hard to figure out which step it's related to. Um, One of the things I've also noticed with Copilot is that when it's creating steps that have like output variables, for instance, here, creates Excel instance, that kind of thing, it doesn't always work. For some reason, it doesn't always recognize that those variables exist from the steps that Copilot created. So what I find is when you run into that kind of thing, what you have to do is you have to kind of go through each of these and you do just like edit and save, hit save until you figure out which step it is that's throwing these errors. Most of the time, there you go. It was that one. So you can see if all you do, you just click edit and then save it, and that resolves the issue. I don't know why that is. Again, this is preview, so it doesn't always work great in desktop mode. But if you get used to the quirks, then you learn how to deal with them and work around them. Um, but yeah, if you see those errors after you do some AI generated actions, just look at the steps that are created, try to figure out which one the error is coming from, and then just do edit save, and then usually 9 times out of 10 that will resolve the issue. If you want to get Copilot open here, so it's the top button usually at the menu. And you can see over here, unlike Cloud, where you get 2,000 characters, you still only get 500 in the designer. So if I wanted to add a step here, so for instance, if it had left off the close Excel, so I'll delete that here. So add a step to close Excel. Do something like that, and it will generate the step for you. And as you see here, what it does is, again, it surrounds it with these regions and these other things. And that, obviously, if you're doing iterations through things, that can get really cluttered and really messy really fast. Another thing to remember is that if you have a step out highlighted, it will insert it right after that step instead of inserting it at the end. So make sure you kind of watch that. So here I would just drag that up here, and then just delete these. Just kind of clean it up a little bit. Again, that can get annoying after a while, especially if you're doing a lot of iterations. The other thing to remember here is with Copilot on desktop, there's this drop-down box that doesn't exist on cloud. And you have to be careful about what one you have, what type you have here. So for instance, if I wanted to summarize this, flow, and you can see I've got add a step as the selected option here at the moment. Here just a little bit. What it will do if it's on add a step instead is it will actually, this time it didn't work, but half the time what it will do is it actually will create like a pop-up step and say message box, and in that message box it will provide the message describing what the flow does. So if you want to actually summarize a flow, you need to change the drop down to something like summarize actions. Say, okay, summarize what this flow does. And then it will actually provide you the summary over here. So it says, launching Excel, blah 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 blah. So that's just the biggest thing, the biggest quirks that you have to kind of keep in mind when you're working with Power Automate Copilot on the desktop. All right, so let's jump back over to our slides. And let's just talk briefly about Automation Center. So if you do anything with Automation Center in Copilot, or sorry, in Power Automate, um, there's not much that Copilot can do in Automation Center. It can analyze the logs a little bit and provide some summary of what has happened in automation or in your flows for the last month. That's about it. Um, can create a little bit of generative, a little bit of data or reports around uh, activity for the last month or however long, and there's really not much else. So I won't touch on that any more than that. Let's talk about Copilot Studio. So this is where I think really the future and the power of the relationship between Copilot and Power Automate exists. So, we've looked at ways that you can use Copilot to kind of help you work with your flows and with Power Automate. But, what about the other way around? What if we want to be able to create AI agents that have access to Power Automate flows? Well, you can do that with Copilot Studio. Um, so in general, there's some things to keep in mind. So let's here to Copilot Studio here. Okay. So we've got this agent here, and I'll walk through this example here in a minute, but some kind of things to remember is they call these agentic flows as flows that you create to work in a Copilot agent. Uh, those flows work almost exactly the same way as your normal flows. There are a couple of restrictions though. So your flow must be a part of a solution. It must have a specific trigger, and that trigger is when an agent calls a flow, is what it's called now. And somewhere in the actions of that flow, there must be a step that says respond to the agent. So if you've got those, and it must also exist in the same environment as the agent. So your agent and your flow have to be in the same environment. You can create the flows in the Power Automate interface, and sometimes Copilot Studio will be able to see them, and sometimes it won't. Figure out why that is the case. Even if I've set up the agent or if I've set up the flow exactly as the instructions describe, um, sometimes it just can't see the flow that I've created in the make.powerautomate website. So it's usually a lot better to create your agent or create your flow from Copilot Studio and do it there instead. Um, let's jump back over to our interface here. So I've got Copilot Studio open, and you can see you've actually got Copilot up here to help you use Copilot to create Copilots. But I've got this one that I've already created called Blog Search Assistant. Basically, what this one will do, open that up. Basically, what this is just a Copilot agent that can go out and look at my website, my YouTube channel, and be able to answer questions from that. So, um, so if I ask, testing my agent, what can I do with, um, Aspire? And it'll go out and look at my blog, and it will uh, get some answers about .NET Aspire, or just Aspire as it's called now, and provide some resources about that. So you can see it's giving me some answers here. So let's go back to our overview here. Under tools, you can add tools, and those tools among the tools that you can add are flows. So if I actually go over here to the agent flows here, and you can see I've created this agent flow called check the weather. And if I open that up, you can see a very familiar interface. Looks very much like that. Um, the Power Automate interface here. You can see I can run it, I can turn it off, I can do repair tips. And if I click on the designer here, you'll see that the designer is very similar to what I see in the Power Automate interface. I've got my various steps. And as I mentioned, the very first step is when an agent calls the flow. In this particular case, I'm just returning some static text. The weather in Columbus is cloudy, and it's responding to the agent. So as I mentioned, the trigger has to be when an agent calls the flow. And you can pass in inputs. You can have it provide inputs there, and then respond to the agent. It has to provide a response back to the agent. So if I go back to my agents here, I look at my blog search assistant, and you can see I've listed that as among my among my tools. If I wanted to add a tool, if I wanted to create a new one, I could click there and do click flow. And you can see, there are the existing flows that I could add, or I can create a new one. If you create a flow from the Copilot Studio interface, and then you want to go back and edit it with the Power Automate interface, you can do that, and it always shows up. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it doesn't show up if you do it the other way, and I don't know why. For instance, if I come over here and I look at my check the weather, and you can see if I go edit, and here's my steps. The agent calls the flow, here's my static text, and responding to the agent. And then so you can see it's very straightforward and simple to create a flow and have it be able to have access to that. So if I test my agent, what's weather like? I'll say, okay, he's asking about the weather. I'm going to use this flow that I've got here about checking the weather, and gives the response: the weather in Columbus is currently cloudy. And if you've been to Ohio, that's always accurate almost. So it becomes very simple and easy to access flows from Copilot Studio. These are really where the power of that relationship, as I mentioned, is going to really bloom in the future, is being able to take your flows and, with minor modifications, be able to have your Copilot agents access those flows and make use of them and get the results back. And any pretty much any connector that flow has access to, your Copilot Studio agent has access to use that through that flow. Excuse me. And it's, if you want to add it to your agent, it's really as simple as going in here to your tools, adding a tool, and selecting that. So feelings, got this one here. Add and configure. And it's really that simple. So if there's any configuration, like, being able to pass in parameters, things like that, then you would configure it that way. And it's just that simple to add access to the agent, to the flow from your agent. In this particular case, it's the name of the tool, description of it. There are no inputs, so there's nothing to configure there. And that's pretty much it. That's all I need to do in order to have that be added to my Copilot agent and have access to it. So things like security, the flow has to have it basically inherits the security from your agent. So whatever security your agent has, that gets passed into the flow. Things like connectors and that, it's really gets a little bit more complicated. That's something that you can delve into as you experiment with it. I'm just kind of pointing out what you can do with this. Getting into that kind of stuff is beyond the scope of this discussion here today. So hope you can see the power this potentially has, and taking your Power Automate flows to the next level by giving your Copilot agents access to them, be able to use them, and be able to work with them. And as with all these kinds of things, you have to, if you make changes to it, you have to publish those changes in order for it to work. So really, that's about it. Let's finish off with some slides here. And if you are looking for more information about this stuff, of course, the the Power Automate uh, and Copilot Studio learning, Microsoft Learn websites have a great deal of information about how to do this kind of stuff. There's some great YouTube channels, and if you want to get a hold of me, you can check out my blog. You can look at my YouTube channel, connect with me on LinkedIn. All these various ways of getting a hold of me. Um, and I hope that you found this information useful. Thank you.